It all started in what was supposed to be the safest place for my family, a quiet neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns and friendly waves from across the street. I never imagined that the very organization meant to keep order, the homeowners association, would turn into my worst nightmare. At first, it was just small warnings slipped into my mailbox. A misplaced trash can, a minor paint chip on the fence, things every homeowner goes through. I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing serious. But soon, those notices grew harsher, and the tone changed from polite reminders to threats. One day, my kids were playing outside, their laughter filling the air, when I unknowingly broke what seemed like the most insignificant HOA rule. I thought the matter would end with a fine or another letter. Instead, I came home to an empty yard, toys scattered, and silence that chilled me to the bone. My children were gone. Panic surged through me as neighbors whispered, and the HOA insisted they had authority to enforce their rules in ways I could never have imagined. I searched desperately, making calls, knocking on doors, pleading for answers. The more I uncovered, the darker the truth became. Behind the closed doors of the HOA boardroom, there was more than paperwork and penalties. There was power, corruption, and intimidation. They weren't just a group of neighbors keeping order. They had turned into something far more dangerous. Every move I made to question them only led to more pushback, more silence, and more fear. I knew then that I couldn't stay quiet. No parent should ever be forced to live in terror within their own community. I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to fight back. But the deeper I pushed, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about broken rules. It was about control. And if I wanted to bring my kids home, I would have to bring the entire board down with the truth. That was the moment I realized the fight had only just begun. I had always thought of the HOA as nothing more than a group of people arguing over lawn decorations and parking spots. Most of us just paid the dues and tried to stay out of trouble. But after what happened to my family, I started looking at every detail with new eyes. The neighbors who once smiled at me suddenly avoided my gaze. The board members who used to speak in polite tones now carried themselves with a strange sense of authority, as if they were untouchable. It felt less like a community and more like a trap I hadn't noticed until it was too late at night. I sat at my kitchen table going through old letters and notices the HOA had sent. There were patterns I hadn't paid attention to before. Families who challenged the board seemed to disappear quietly, moving away without explanation. Empty houses would be resold within weeks, and rumors floated that those families left in fear, though no one dared to say it out loud. Every warning I read felt heavier, like clues to something much bigger than paint colors or grass height. I began asking questions, carefully at first, to people I trusted. A neighbor finally whispered to me that the HOA board had connections I wouldn't want to cross. It wasn't just about rules, it was about money, influence, and control over every family in the neighborhood. The idea that my children were caught in the middle of this web made my stomach twist. But the more people warned me to stay quiet, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to let fear silence me. Each step I took revealed another layer of secrecy, another sign that this was more dangerous than I ever imagined. And the closer I got to the truth, the more I realized I was being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that every move I made was being tracked. When I drove to work, I noticed the same car in my rearview mirror more than once. When I stepped outside to take out the trash, porch lights flicked on around the street, almost in unison. Even the sound of footsteps behind me on late evening walks made me glance over my shoulder, heart racing. The HOA had turned from a faceless group of rule enforcers into something that felt like a shadow hanging over my every decision. I kept replaying the moment I realized my kids were gone, trying to understand how things could escalate so far. The board members had always carried themselves with smug confidence, dressed in crisp suits for meetings that seemed far too formal for a neighborhood association. At the time, I thought it was just pride. I wondered if it was something more, if they were hiding behind polished appearances while running a system built on fear. Digging through public records became my nightly ritual. I discovered that several board members were connected through more than just property lines. They shared businesses, contracts, and financial ties that had nothing to do with landscaping or parking permits. It was as if the HOA was just a front, a mask to control not only the neighborhood, but the people living in it. Neighbors I tried to confide in became nervous the moment I brought up the subject. Some shut their doors quickly. Others whispered that I should stop before I made things worse. It was clear no one wanted to speak openly, but the silence around me only fueled my suspicion. The more I searched, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about broken rules, it was about power. And I had already stepped too far into their secrets to turn back. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous everything began to feel. It wasn't just the silence from neighbors or the cold stares from board members, it was the little things that told me I was being pushed into a corner. My mailbox started showing up empty, even when I knew bills and letters had been sent. Notes appeared on my doorstep with no signature, just short warnings telling me to stop digging. At night, I'd hear the faint hum of cars idling outside. My house, their headlights off, waiting. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every detail, names, dates, strange encounters, anything that could later prove what was happening. The HOA board had always claimed to be about protecting community standards, but now it was clear they were protecting something else. Their meetings had become closed-door sessions, guarded, almost secretive, with decisions announced but never explained. Whenever I tried to attend, I was told I wasn't on the agenda. It was like they were running their own government within the neighborhood. With no accountability, the hardest part was knowing my kids were caught in the middle of this fight. Every day without answers gnawed at me, and every lead I followed felt like a race against time. The board members acted untouchable, moving through the neighborhood with a confidence that made my blood boil. They believed no one could challenge them, that their authority was beyond question. But the more they tried to scare me, the stronger my resolve grew. I had gathered enough evidence to know their power was built on lies, intimidation, and manipulation. The tension in the air was so thick it was hard to breathe. I knew something had to break soon. And then came the night that everything reached its tipping point. The night I finally stood face to face with the board, ready to expose the truth that could bring their entire empire crashing down. I walked into that boardroom convinced I finally had the upper hand. My notes, my research, the evidence I had gathered, it was all in my hands, ready to shatter their false authority. But the moment I stepped inside, I realized I had underestimated them. The room wasn't filled with panic or guilt. Instead, every board member sat calmly, their eyes fixed on me with the kind of quiet confidence that sent a chill down my spine. They weren't worried. If anything, they looked prepared. Before I could speak, the president of the HOA slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside were photographs me leaving my house, me talking to neighbors, me driving to work. They had been watching me far closer than I imagined. And then I saw the worst photo of all, my kids. It wasn't just about rules or fines anymore. They were making it clear that every step I took, every move I made, was under their control. The shock hit me like a wave, but I couldn't show fear. I realized in that moment that they wanted me to break, to back down, to leave quietly like the others. Instead, I pushed the folder back across the table and demanded to know where my children were. That's when another truth came crashing down, one I wasn't prepared for. A neighbor I had trusted, someone I believed was on my side, stepped into the room. He wasn't just a bystander in all of this. He had been working with the board the entire time. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had faced so far. It meant I couldn't trust anyone, and it meant the board's influence stretched farther than I thought. My fight wasn't just against a few corrupt leaders anymore. It was against an entire system built to keep people like me powerless. And as their cold stares locked on me, I knew the real battle was only beginning. The tension in that boardroom felt like it could snap at any second. For a moment, it seemed like I was trapped, outnumbered, and powerless. But what the HOA didn't know was that I had already taken the fight beyond the neighborhood. Every note, every photo, every strange encounter, I had been feeding it all. To an investigator who had been quietly watching the board for months, while they thought they were tracking me, I had been building a case strong enough to tear their power apart from the inside. When the board president leaned back with a smirk, confident that I had no choice but to give in, the doors suddenly burst open. Law enforcement officers stepped inside, their presence filling the room with a silence thicker than anything I'd felt before. The board members froze, their arrogance crumbling in an instant as warrants were read.